Today I'm going to be talking about the terminology and the vocabulary of the herbalist.
Yes! Please subscribe!
In this section we're looking at the terminology and the vocabulary of herbalists. Now this is divided into two sections. There is the terminology of healthcare, that's all your diseases and ailments and stuff like this, and there's a terminology of botanical names that the herbalist will use. Now this is a very, very long lesson, and it's a very, very interesting lesson. I thought it was going to be boring, but as I read on, I found it was quite interesting. So I'm leaving the name of the course or the link to the course in the description box below, and it's absolutely free. So feel free to go there and just browse through it and look for yourself. Now the first question he asks is, why do we study terminology? And this is quite a good question, because why do we want to know all these fancy terminologies? And he starts off by saying the discoverers, as they discovered things, they had a problem in naming things, because accurately describing them, because they didn't quite know how to do it, and it seemed like it was too wordy in English. So they borrowed from the Greek and the Latin, and they used suffixes and prefixes. But in the beginning, when they started, they would borrow words from people like Hippocrates and Galen and Celsus, which are great physicians of the past. And Hippocrates would use words like asthma, diarrhea and epilepsy, which are all common words for us today, but they were used before Christ, during Hippocrates' time. And they were accurately describing what the diseases were. And so they sort of like followed in that tack by borrowing, as I say, from the Latin or the Greek, and using suffixes and prefixes. So he gives an example in this course of a rhinoceros. Now that's quite an alien creature. When you first encountered it, it's a big bulky animal which had this massive sort of horn on the tip of its nose. How do you actually describe this? Now, so they went to the Greek and they said, well, a nose is a rhisis. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing all these words right, but I can read it, and rhisis is R-H-I-S. And the word for horn was keros, and now they put these two words together and they got rhinoceros, which basically describes an animal with a horn on the tip of its nose. And so this was quite accurately described, and this was back in the 14th century. So they carried on doing this for a number of things. So now if you take, for example, the word of acute rhinitis. Now acute means sudden onset. Now rhinitis, what does that mean? Well, rhitis we know is a nose, and itis means, which is a suffix and it's used in a lot of the words, means inflammation. So now we know it's an acute onset of inflammation of the nose, which when you break it down, I mean, this sounds more complicated, but it's what we call today a common cold, because suddenly it just comes on you and your nose gets all inflamed. So as these words go, they describe the symptoms, or the main symptom of the condition that you've got. So when you look at things like the allergic rhinitis, what does that mean? It means an allergic action that inflames the nose. And this is nothing more than something like hay fever. And a couple of other allergies will go along with this. Now, on a more serious condition, something like arthritis. Now, arthur means joints, and itis means inflammation. So now you know it's inflammation of the joints. So now, I can tell you, after reading through this course and studying it, this lesson, the words were quite demystified. I felt quite enlightened, and as if I'd come out of the dark ages into the modern world. And I can understand my doctor a little better, and I'm sure he's pretty grateful for that. Now, I say to myself, how's this going to help me better understand herbalism? Why am I studying? I mean, it's nice to sit down and say, yeah, I know, I can pick up my tablets, and some tablets, and they will have these names inside them, and they're describing the symptoms of what the medicine inside is going to be doing, and it's all incorporated in the name. And it's quite interesting, and I quite like this. But I always say, what's it going to do? How's it going to help me to understand herbalism better? Now, we all know how to basically diagnose simple sort of common day ailments, like a cold. I say, I've got a cold. My chest is coughy. My chest is sort of phlegmy and stuff like this. I'm coughing up all sorts of stuff. And so now I can understand that if I know the medical term, it tells me exactly what's wrong with it. So now, take the example of arthritis. I now know that I've got inflamed joints. Now I can look down my list of herbs, and I can see which ones reduce inflammation of the joints if I've got my arthritis. And so now I can adjust my diet, or I can make some sort of herbal remedies to assist the inflammation in my joints, or maybe even a lotion or cream that I can sort of rub on the outside of the joints to reduce the inflammation. So now I'm much better equipped because I know the Greek and Latin terminology, or the technical name for it. So I found that this is really helpful. Now, for example, if I go to my doctor and he says to me, Jonathan, look, you've got enteritis. Now suddenly I know, okay, enteritis is the inflammation of my intestines. It's different to gastroenteritis, which is the inflammation of your stomach. So now I can look through all my herbs, and I can see which ones work for inflammation of the stomach. And I can have a look at it, and I don't have to take the toxic medicines that cost me a whack of money. I can just simply go down to my hedgerow, or when I get them in my garden, I can go into my garden and I can have a look, and I can make my own sort of, my own sort of medicines that are much more gentler on my system. Now, this is not totally true for all diseases. Now, I suffer from diabetes. And diabetes, if you take the word dia, which is through, like in diameter, it's a measurement through the circle to get it. So dia means through, and the diabetes part comes in from diabenum, I think, which means like a siphon. Now, when you get diabetes, you normally going to the toilet, you're passing urine quite a lot. Now, this is not going to really help me with diabetes, because diabetes is sometimes a little more complicated, and so it's not sufficient in itself. It gives me an example that if I'm getting, if I'm passing urine or something like this, I'm going running to the toilet a lot, I might have diabetes, and I better go and get it checked out with my doctor. So he can do the blood tests, and he can do a whole lot of other tests for me, urine tests and all sorts, to see whether I've got diabetes. Now, this is why the naming is not in itself sufficient. You have to go on and study all the glands and stuff like this, and some of the diseases a little more in depth. Like with diabetes, it's the control of the insulin in the body and stuff like this, and it's linked to all sorts of other stuff with cholesterol and stuff like this. But you've got to understand where cholesterol's made, and it's what it's doing, and where the insulin is made, the pancreatic. So I would have to prescribe myself like things like pancreatic enzymes and stuff like this to try and help digest my food faster, and a whole host of other things. So, but that's for a different lesson later on. The name itself cannot, in that case, give me the clue. Now, in part 2. Now, part 1, remember, is just, there is far more than I've told you. He gives loads of names. There are really stacks of them, and he covers them step by step, and he breaks them down for you in easy, sort of manageable ways to remember all these things. Now, in part 2, he's naming plants and herbs. Now, there's 2 names. There's a common name and the botanical name. Now, we are interested mainly in the botanical names. And the classification, he talks about classification or taxonomy or systematics. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these words, but plants are classified by structure, function, development, and evolutionary history. Now, there was the universal sort of cataloguing technique that's in use now was developed in the 18th century by a Swedish naturalist, Carl von Linné. Now, in this system, he said the highest classification is a kingdom, and there are two types of kingdoms. There's the, living organisms have two types of kingdoms. There's the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. And the hierarchy of the plant kingdom is the one that we're most sort of interested in. He doesn't cover it in great deal, but there's a sort of, you can see it up over here, the division, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. Now, according to the internationally accepted rule, a species is always identified by two technical names. With plants, this is known as a botanical name, and that's the name that we're going to be interested in. The other one is obviously the common name. Botanical names are Latin, and they're reused uniformly all over the world. So there's not, if it's called a basic sort of hedgerows is called a Rosa multiflora. Now, the first word always identifies the genus in this where the species belong, but the common name may change from country to country. But the botanical name will never change, and that's quite important to ensure that you're getting the correct sort of herb that you want. Now, some of these herbs have had names and they've been used for many, many years. And this is what I quite like. A lot of the herbs have this name officinalis. Now, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but officinalis is a name. For example, the garden marigold is a calendula officinalis. A marshmallow is a Althea officinalis. A morinda is a Morinda officinalis. Now, officinalis means of a storeroom, and it's related to words like official or office and stuff like this. Now, in the past, these herbs, were herbs that were officially recognized for their medicinal use. So the apocryphers knew which herbs to use. And so this was quite important for the herbalist to know that these are the herbs that you should be using and not any other. Today it simply means it's medicinal. And so plants that, not all medicinal plants or plants that have medicinal uses have got officinalis on them, but certainly a lot of the older ones were when they were classified. For example, a morinda. Now, you get the Morinda officinalis, which has medicinal uses, and you get the Morinda certiflora, which also has official sort of, well, not official, but certainly got medicinal uses. Now, certiflora, it means it's the citrus leaves. And both have the medicinal uses. So don't confuse that officinalis, it just is the only medicinal plants around. But it's almost like, for me, it was like a crib sheet. If it's got officinalis, I know it's got a medicinal purpose. I can go and have a look up what medicinal purposes they are for, and they probably go way back. Now, some plants are obviously named from the places where they were discovered, like the Pygium, I think that's how you spell it. I'll put the word up here, is Prunus africana. Is its botanical name, and it's indigenous to Africa. This is where it was discovered, so they gave it that. Now, the other important one that, well, I think it's important, is a plant that's got satvia or satvium, which means cultivated herb. So if it's got that word inside there, I'll put them over here, it means a cultivated herb. Now, we know there's a lot of plants or herbs that have been harvested, and they're on the endangered species list. And in which case, it's sometimes prudent to go to the cultivated plants with similar sort of properties because they're not endangered. And so, I think that's the end of this sort of session. I know it's been a long one, and you probably think it's boring, but for me, it's been really exciting. It's been quite an eye-opener, and I feel that I'm a little more enlightened, and I'm really enjoying this. And I want you to take care and have the best of health. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.